Hello, I'm Lauren Haldeman, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Nutrition Education and Behavior, where we are advancing research, policy, and practice. Each month, we select an article to feature as a press release with an accompanying podcast. And today's podcast article can be read in full at www.jneb.org for free for the next 3 months. And today, I'm speaking with Dr. Katy Bauer, who's the corresponding author for the article titled Federal Food Program Participation and Beverage Intake Among Families with Low Household Income. I'm glad to have you with us today, Kate. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited. So I am an associate professor of nutritional sciences in the University of Michigan School of Public Health. And my research really focuses on young children's eating behaviors, dietary intake, and obesity risk, and thinking about families and parenting. I do a lot of research on sort of the shoulds and shouldn'ts of what parents need to do to raise healthy children, but I'm increasingly interested in the context in which we parent and the policies and environments that make healthy nutrition parenting easier, which is what led to the work today in thinking about how our federal food assistance programs, namely SNAP and WIC, can support parents in feeding their children's healthy diets.
Great, thanks so much. You've got a lot of interesting things going on there. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of your paper, including what you did and a little bit about your results?
Sure. In this study, what we aimed to do was to understand beverage intake among low-income mothers and their young children by looking across their participation in SNAP, WIC, SNAP and WIC together, or neither program. And really our motivations were that, there's a nice body of research on what are the dietary habits of individuals participating in SNAP or individuals participating in WIC. But we really found that few studies accounted for this dual program participation. Meanwhile, a really meaningful percent of parents, particularly those who have young children, are participating in both SNAP and WIC. And of course, they're participating probably in other food assistance programs, although we didn't measure that in this study. But we really started to think, from a family perspective, how are people using the available resources and sort of bringing together different benefits to support their dietary decisions? We also knew that, in the SNAP literature, it tends to focus on adults' beverage intake. Meanwhile, the WIC literature tends to focus on children's intake. So in this study, our ability to look at both mothers and children, we felt like was a strength, and again, gave us a bit more holistic perspective on the family. And the third thing that we were able to do in this study was look at bottled water intake. So bottled water intake is pretty prevalent, particularly among communities of color. There's a lot of distrust of tap water, particularly here in Michigan, with the Flint water crisis and our other water contaminations. And we know that, choosing or feeling like you have to purchase bottled water to safely drink water is a huge burden on low-income families. So we wanted to, again, understand, for families participating in these federal food assistance programs, what does their intake of bottled water look like? And sort of being able to somewhat understand from there how much of that is an economic burden on these families. And so this study, we, like many studies, we had received the funding and planned it out right pre-COVID, and we had intended to do in-person data collection, but we quickly transitioned in summer and fall of 2020, and we were really fortunate that the University of Michigan has a data office for clinical and translational research, which allows us to query patients in our health system who have certain characteristics and invite them to participate in research. This service has actually been amazing. I've been using it in lots of different studies and collaborating with investigators across the country who are like, oh my gosh, like you can reach parents, you can know who is been in for a pediatric visit or who has, public insurance, that type of thing. So what we did was we queried mothers of infants born within the past 5 years, because we were targeting mothers of young children, and specifically mothers who were insured by Medicaid, to get a sample that, at least at the time of their children's birth, they were did have low household income. And a large proportion of these mothers had an email available in their medical record. And so we did all of our recruitment via email and all of our data collection online through a Qualtrics survey. We did learn a lot of lessons about online recruitment and data collection that I would love to share with investigators at another time, because there's a lot of heartache when you learn that your survey has been spammed by bots. So we did a lot of quality control checks, making sure that each patient received an individualized link, they couldn't share it with anyone else, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of lessons to be learned. And so we ended up with about 500 mothers who completed our online survey. Of those, 400 or so had a child between the ages of 1 and 4. We did have many mothers who had infant children, but infant children should be drinking breast milk or formula. And so we were less interested in their other beverage intake. And mothers completed, a short number of well-regarded measures regarding their beverage intake, their children's intake, other relevant covariates, and obviously their participation in SNAP and or WIC. And what we found, just like we hypothesized, there was a really nice distribution of families who were only participating in SNAP, only participating WIC, participating in both. We actually had 28% of our families were both participating in SNAP and WIC, and 32% were participating in neither program. There were demographic differences. So the families participating in both SNAP and WIC were more likely to identify as Black race. Meanwhile, for example, the families only participating in WIC were more likely to be Latina ethnicity. And we assume that has, undocumented individuals can participate in WIC, but not SNAP. So we thought that might be why we're seeing some of those racial and ethnic disparities. Overall, what we found, the patterns across the paper were really that both mothers and children, if their households participated in both SNAP and WIC, they were more likely to consume sugar-sweetened beverages on a weekly basis. And also mothers were more likely to consume bottled water. And this was adjusting for many covariates that, sociodemographics that may explain some of the differences between our WIC and SNAP participants versus our other groups. And specifically, actually, the most of the differences were seen between that WIC and SNAP participating group and those who didn't participate in any federal food assistance, or at least not WIC or SNAP. So we really didn't see a lot among the families that participated in only WIC or the families that participated in only SNAP, but it seemed to be this confluence of the two programs. And again, we can't tell, is it just something different about those families? They were sort of more economically vulnerable. Again, they were more likely to identify as Black. And, we know that communities have been marginalized, and there are different marketing towards these communities. There's lots of potential explanations, but really the key finding is that families who are participating in both WIC and SNAP, at least with respect to beverage intake, seem to be fairly nutritionally vulnerable. And very few studies look at the combination of these programs and real potential for intervention by where benefits and services in these programs come together.
Great, thanks for that overview. Thinking about the large landscape of federal food assistance programs, can you talk a little bit about the value of looking at the scope of these programs versus our traditional strategy of really seeking to understand diet and health outcomes associated with participation in a single program.
Yeah. I think there's value in both approaches. There are different questions, right? When we're trying to understand how might SNAP, contribute to different, dietary patterns or something like that, it is going to be, you're going to look at just SNAP. Hopefully, though, you will account for control for participation in other programs, because what our paper did show is that it makes a difference. It's a different sample of families who are participating in multiple programs, and those differences might lead to some of the observations that we tend to find. SNAP is associated with the WIC, or SNAP is associated with this diet pattern, or WIC is associated with this diet pattern. It might not actually be that program, but the families who are using that program plus other programs. So at the very least, I think accounting or controlling for using other programs, but also, again, this way families are navigating a really complex system of a lot of different sources of food, sources of financial incentives. In one of my other projects, we are seeking to really amplify the experiences and the voices of families experiencing food insecurity. And, they, as you can imagine, on a day-to-day basis are navigating, their children are getting school meals, they might be using a food pantry, they are getting WIC benefits, they are very commonly participating in SNAP. And again, they're always making decisions about, okay, I can purchase my milk with WIC, but I can't purchase soda, so I'm going to use my SNAP for that, right? And they're trying to navigate these food environments with different resources that have different limitations, and they have different options. And so I really feel like our view of looking at multiple participation in multiple programs was giving better insight into, again, what is going on in these families' lives. How are they, we didn't, obviously get at this, but I think these would be the next questions, is sort of what are those decisions, and why are they choosing to use, one program for this and one program for that. But bottom line, the reality is that, families don't just participate in one program. They're really, again, navigating this complex network of different resources that all, influence their choices and their behaviors in slightly different ways.
Yeah, I think the approach is a good one, certainly because households are made up of many different people across the lifespan. And by looking at multiple programs, you're getting from prenatal, quite possibly up through older adults and grandparents. So this really takes a look at this from a more comprehensive approach. So you're finding about beverage consumption. When thinking about that, what are some strategies that might successfully promote healthier beverage intake among families participating in WIC and SNAP?
Yeah, well, this is certainly a big conversation. I often tell my students, I think, about 10 years ago, right, we started talking about, oh gosh, should SNAP benefits be restricted? And we're still talking about it. And we still don't totally have clear answers. So obviously, whether or not this is politically feasible, I don't know, but some could say that we should not allow sugar sweetened beverage purchases with SNAP benefits. My read of the literature is that that does not seem, in pilot studies, it does not seem like that is very successful, right? There's massive marketing of sugar sweetened beverages to lower income families. There's a lot of reasons, very valid reasons, why lower income families are choosing to, purchase and drink sugar sweetened beverages for themselves and their children. And I've really come to feel, again, through this project and others where we're really connecting with families and their lived experience, I've really come to feel that when we take sort of autonomy and dignity away from families and tell them, you don't know how to make good decisions, essentially, right? That's how they hear restrictions, is you don't know how to make good decisions for your family. what I've really learned and increasingly every day see is that families really, really want the best for their children. And if they are given resources, they make the right decisions and good decisions and often healthful decisions for their family. So I am not an advocate of sort of restrictive approaches. So then we can think about other approaches, right? So nutrition incentive programs, double up food bucks. These are, I think, really positive additions to our federal food assistance landscape, and are the direction that USDA and others are really heading to promote healthier intake. So we know right now that those kind of programs where you get, double the value of your benefits for fruits and vegetables, we know their impact on fruits and vegetables. We don't know their impact on other sources of food. And also, we're hearing from families, hey, could we do double up food bucks on, skim or low fat milk? Could we do it on lean meats? Like, why only fruits and vegetables? And I think that's a great question. And again, those giving families sort of more value for their benefits is a really positive, dignified way to approach food assistance that makes families, feel really good and feel in control of their food choices. Beyond looking at sort of changes to our food programs, I've mentioned it before. I think the beverage industry, we know, again, targets lower income families. We've seen that they target, lower prices on the days that they know SNAP assistance or SNAP benefits are issued. There's a lot of manipulation of families who have limited resources. Again, in the past 20 years that I've been in this field, we haven't made great progress at restricting marketing and things like that. But, I think that may be driving some of this behavior, right? Feeling like we know that low-income families, feel like sugar sweetened beverages and other sort of comfort foods are maybe all that they can afford for their children. And we've sort of created that as a snack or a gift or a fun thing. And so again, it makes sense why families are choosing that. I had one other thought as I was talking through this I wanted to talk about bottled water, right? So again, we saw that mothers participating in both SNAP and WIC were more likely to drink bottled water than mothers not participating in either program. And as I mentioned in the beginning, bottled water, when you are scared or you're uncertain that your tap water is safe to drink, you feel like you have no other choice but to drink bottled water. And in most of our country, in most of our regions, tap water is safe to drink. And so it's really, unfortunately, an expense that parents are bearing when they don't have to. So I'm increasingly interested in the intersections of food insecurity and feeling like families have access to safe water. And I think, initiatives that help families understand whether their tap water is safe to drink, whether it's communicating findings from their local water treatment centers, things like that, could have potential to make them more confident in their tap water and really reduce that expenditure and be able to use their SNAP benefits, at least for other choices for their family. So I think there's a lot of intervention opportunities that sort of open the world up to families rather than restrict down.
Great. I think the work that you've guys going on right now has got a lot of wonderful practical application, and you've got a lot of great questions to understand moving forward. Absolutely. So nice work. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think I've covered all about the content of our paper. I do, of course, want to thank my collaborators on this endeavor, and particularly our lead author was a master's student here in our MS Nutritional Sciences program at Michigan. So she has moved on to become a clinical dietitian, and she's out in the world, but I get the honor of representing her work here. So thank you.
Thanks. And thanks very much, Kate, for spending time with me today and talking about the great work that you're doing. And to all of our listeners, remember, you can read this article in full at www.jneb.org for free for the next 3 months.